The docking bay doors refused to open. Principal Wrath pressed all four hands against the security panel, watching the flashing red symbols with growing irritation. 30 cycles of running the Academy of Advanced Species, and never once had the automated systems rejected a scan like this. Override accepted. The computer finally announced warning. Unregistered biological signature detected. Skarnath DNA confirmed. Recommend immediate lockdown protocols. Rat's compound eyes widened. A Skarnath. Here up, those creatures existed only in forbidden military databases and nightmare scenarios used to train security forces. The insectoid principal's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of stress that students had learned to recognize over the years. The view screen flickered to life, showing docking Bay 7. A small human vessel sat there, covered in scorch marks and what looked like hastily welded patches. Humans were not on the approved species list. The Galactic Consortium had deemed them too primitive, too violent, too unpredictable for institutions like this. One that then Wrath saw movement. A human male walked down the landing ramp with a casual confidence of someone arriving for a scheduled appointment. He wore simple clothing, carried a single bag over his shoulder, and moved like someone who had spent years in variable gravity. Nothing about him suggested danger or concern. What walked beside him made Wrath's breathing spiracles close in automatic fear response. The dragon was young by Skarnath standards, but still massive enough to tear through reinforced hull plating. Obsidian scales caught the station's artificial light, creating patterns that seemed to shift and flow. Wings folded against its body would span the entire docking bay if extended. Eyes like molten copper tracked everything with predator intelligence that made Wrath's instinct scream danger. Yet the creature followed the human like a devoted companion. No distrance, no control collar, no visible weapons or containment fields, just a human and a dragon walking together as if this were the most natural thing in the galaxy. Security team to docking bay 7. Wrath commanded through the comm system. Full tactical deployment. Do not engage unless threatened. I repeat, do not engage. Wrath reached the main entrance just as automated defense drones surrounded the pair. The human stopped, raised both hands slowly in a gesture of peace. The dragon remained perfectly still, though its tail coiled protectively closer to the human's legs. My name is David Reed, the human said, as translator, rendering the words clear. Consortium standard. I'm here about the teaching position. Teaching position. The human said it like this was a normal interview, like he hadn't just arrived with a living weapon of mass destruction. Wrath's administrative mind automatically pulled up the job posting from 2 weeks ago. Interspecies cooperation instructor needed. 3 qualified candidates had already declined after reviewing the student roster. The Academy does not accept applications from unregistered species, Wrath said, keeping 2 hands visible, while the other 2 work the security override panel, and we certainly do not permit apex predators on campus. Ash isn't a predator, David replied. The dragon's head turned slightly at the name. Well, technically yes, but that's like saying water is wet. Factual, but not really the point. The drones weapons charged with a high-pitched whine. Wrath watched the dragon's eyes track each one with mathematical precision. The creature could destroy them all in seconds if it chose. Every tactical simulation Wrath had ever studied said so, yet it remained motionless, waiting. The point, David continued, is that I received a message saying you needed someone who understood how to teach different species to work together. That's what I do by bringing a Scarath to an educational facility. Wrath's voice carried disbelief across 3 different vocal chambers, by proving that understanding beats fear. Every single time, David lowered his hand slowly. Look, I know how this seems strange. Human shows up with a dragon, claims he the teacher expects to be taken seriously, but I didn't travel 6 weeks through jump space just to turn around. At least let me explain why I'm here. Wrath should have refused. Every protocol demanded immediate removal of both human and dragon. The consortium had strict rules about contamination risks, about maintaining standards, about keeping dangerous elements away from students, but something in a human's voice made Wrath hesitate. Not arrogance or desperation, just simple confidence born from experience. The same tone Wrath used when explaining complex administrative procedures to new faculty. Interview Room 3. Wrath decided you come alone. The creature stays in the docking bay under armed guard. David looked at the dragon. The dragon looked back. No words passed between them, but Wrath watched something transfer in that moment of eye contact. Understanding, agreement, trust. Ash will wait here, David said, but if your guards try anything, you'll find out exactly how protective he gets. The dragon settled onto its hunches, wings folding tighter, its massive head lowered to rest on crossed 4 legs, eyes half closing. To anyone else, it might have lip relaxed. Wrath saw the coiled tension in every muscle, the way those copper eyes tracked every movement within range. Follow me, Wrath said, turning toward the interior corridors. And human, understand that this interview is a courtesy, nothing more. Courtesy is a good start, David replied, falling in a step beside the principal. That's more than most species have given us. They walked through hallways designed for a dozen different environmental requirements. Temperature zones shifted every few meters. Atmospheric processors hummed, adjusting oxygen levels, humidity, and pressure. Students moved between classes, carefully maintaining species-appropriate distances. That a group of Quilvan students pressed themselves against the wall as Wrath and David passed, their tentacles curling. Automatic defensive posture. They had clearly heard about the arrival. News traveled fast in any school, regardless of how many light years from home. They're scared, David observed. They're sensible, Wrath corrected. Fear of legitimate threats is not weakness, it's survival. And when fear becomes the only way species interact with each other, David asked, what do you call that? Wrath didn't answer. The question felt too close to thoughts the principal had been having lately. Watching students self-segregate despite every effort to encourage cooperation. Watching qualified candidates refuse positions because they couldn't imagine teaching certain species together. Interview room 3 was designed for Wrath's biology. Warm, humid, with orange spectrum lighting that made the insect principal's natural coloring more vibrant. David blinked against the shift, but didn't complain. Sit, Wrath commanded, gesturing to the chair with one hand while the other 3 pulled up David's file on the hollow display. Explain why human with no formal credentials, no consortium recognition, and no apparent understanding of proper protocols believes he should teach at. This academy, David sat meeting wraths. Compound gaze without flinching. 3 years ago I found an egg in a destroyed research facility. It was dying. Every civilized species would have destroyed it according to containment protocols. I spent 6 months saving it instead. When Ash hatched, I learned that sometimes the most important lessons have nothing to do with what's proper and everything to do with what's right. Wraths mandibles clicked softly. Continue. David leaned back in the chair, his eyes distant like someone remembering details he wished he could forget. Wrath waited, all 4 hands folded in a posture that conveyed attention despite the principal's instinct to end this interview immediately. I was a salvage operator working the asteroid fields near the Broken Reach. David began. Not glamorous work. Most days involved cutting apart derelict ships for scrap metal and hoping the previous owners didn't leave behind anything explosive. 3 years ago, I got a contract for a research station that had gone dark 6 months prior. The hollow display showed David's records, salvage license, legitimate, safety certifications all current, no criminal history, no consortium violations, unremarkable in every way except for the massive gap in his recent activity logs. The station was a mess. David continued. Hole breaches everywhere, life support completely dead, and signs of a fight that ended very badly for everyone involved. I was about to mark it as a total loss when my sensors picked up a faint energy signature in the lower labs. You went toward an unknown energy signature in a destroyed facility. Wrath said flatly. This demonstrates poor judgment. You're not wrong, David admitted, but salvage operators develop instincts about these things. The signature was biological, not mechanical, something alive in a place where everything should have been dead. For months, Wrath's breathing spiracles flexed, the egg wrapped in emergency stasis fields that were failing. Whoever set them up knew they wouldn't last, but hoped someone would find it in time. David's jaw tightened. The research logs were still partially intact. The legal Boweapon project, they were trying to engineer Scarf as controllable weapons. The egg was their first test subject, pumped full of genetic modifications and neural inhibitors. Then destruction was the correct response, Wrath said. Contaminated biological material from illegal weapons research falls under 17 different consortium regulations requiring immediate disposal. I read those regulations while trying to stabilize the egg. David replied. Every single one of them made perfect sense. Logical, safe, the right choice. According to every authority in the galaxy. He met Wrath's gaze directly. But I kept thinking about what that egg would become if I just followed the rules. A statistic in a report, another victim of someone else's cruelty, gone before ever having a chance to be anything at all. The hollow display flickered as Wrath pulled up more data. Medical supplies purchased over 6 months. Atmospheric regulators, genetic stabilizers that cost more than most salvage operators made in a year. The financial records painted a picture of someone who had sacrificed everything for a project with no guaranteed success. You bankrupted yourself, Wrath observed. I invested in possibility, David corrected. Every species in this galaxy started somewhere. Your people were probably considered primitive once. Mine definitely were, but someone Somewhere decided we deserved a chance. To prove ourselves, I gave Ash the same opportunity. Ash, rat's mandibles. Clicked, you named it him, and yes. Because he's not in it, not a weapon. Not a test subject, not a threat to be managed. David's voice carried conviction that made Wrath's administrative certainty waver. When he hatched, I was terrified. All the data, said Scarneth, imprint on the first living thing they see, usually resulting in the death of that living thing. But Ash looked at me, and I swear I could see him trying to understand, not hunting, not attacking, just trying to figure out this weird universe he'd been born into. And it didn't kill you, Wrath said. Remarkable, he didn't kill me because I didn't treat him like a monster. I talked to him, fed him, kept him warm. When his internal temperature regulation was still developing, taught him that not everything in the universe wanted to hurt him. David smiled slightly. Turns out if you raise something with kindness instead of fear, it tends to be kind rather than fearful. Wrath accessed the Academy's current problem files with two hands while keeping the other two focused on David. Interspecies Cooperation 101 had a 73% failure rate. Students from predator species couldn't work with prey species. Territorial conflicts erupted weekly. The previous instructor had resigned after a vort student and a silly student nearly killed each other during a group project. The position you applied for has very specific requirements, Wrath said. Students from 12 different species, all struggling with biological incompatibilities and cultural prejudices. The curriculum requires demonstrated expertise in conflict resolution, interspecies psychology, and educational methodology. Your credentials show none of these. My credentials show 3 years of teaching a genetically modified dragon to trust instead of destroy, David replied. Every single day was a lesson in communication across impossible barriers. Ash doesn't speak any language. I don't have scales or wings. We found ways to understand each other. Anyway, understanding a single creature is not equivalent to managing a classroom of diverse sapient beings. No. It's harder, David said. Sapient beings can reason, can choose to bridge differences. Ash and I build our entire relationship on instinct and patience. If I could do that with someone the galaxy calls a monster, imagine what I could do with students who actually want to learn. Wrath felt something uncomfortable twisting through multiple thought chambers. This human spoke with the confidence of someone who had already succeeded at the impossible. No bravado, no false promises, just simple acknowledgement of what he had accomplished. The consortium has strict policies about approved teaching methodologies. Wrath tried again. Your approach would violate most of them. Then maybe the consortium's policies need revision, David said quietly. How many students fail your cooperation course every term? How many leave here still believing their species is superior or inferior to others? How many graduate with credentials but without any real understanding of how to work together? The accuracy of those questions made Wrath's grip tighten on the armrests. 73% failure rate. Student conflicts requiring security intervention multiple times per week. Graduates who return to their home worlds and reinforce the same prejudice as the Academy supposedly existed to overcome. You're proposing to fix systemic educational problems with what friendship? Wrath's tone carried Skepticism across all three vocal chambers. I'm proposing to teach that friendship is the foundation, everything else builds on, David replied. Cooperation doesn't start with protocols and procedures, it starts with seeing someone different from yourself and choosing to care anyway. Before Wrath could respond, alarm shrieked through the interview room. Emergency lights strobed red. The hollow display switched automatically to security feeds showing Corridor 7. Students trapped. A malfunctioning security drone, weapons charging, and in the middle of it all, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move, a dragon protecting children it had never met before. Ash, David breathed already. Standing, wait, Raph ended, but the human was already moving toward the door. You sense they were in danger, David called back. That's what I've been trying to explain. It's not about training or control, it's about connection. Wrath followed compound, eyes fixed on the security feed where the impossible was happening. The dragon had positioned itself between the students and the malfunctioning drone. Wings spread as a shield, absorbing energy blasts that should have killed the children huddled behind it. Maybe, Wrath thought while running through corridors designed for careful walking, some lessons couldn't be taught with approved methodologies. Corridor 7 looked like a combat zone. Scorch marks blackened the walls where energy blasts had gone wide. 3 Quilvan students pressed against one corner, their tentacles wrapped around each other. Terror. 2 Horth students huddled nearby, their crystalline bodies dimmed with fear. A Mindra student floated inside their environmental suit, the gaseous form flickering with panic. Between them and the malfunctioning security drone stood Ash, wings spread wide enough to create a living barrier. Energy blasts hammered into those obsidian scale, dissipating in patterns of light that looked almost beautiful if you ignored the deadly purpose behind them. The drone's targeting system had clearly glitched during what should have been a routine safety drill. Its mechanical voice repeated the same phrase over and over. Unauthorized intruders detected. Lethal force authorized in 15 seconds. Comply or be eliminated. Wrath arrived just behind David, breathing hard through spiracles not designed for running. The blast doors had sealed automatically, trapping the students and preventing security teams from reaching them. Standard protocol for contamination scenarios, completely useless for a drone. Malfunction. Override code 77 Alpha. Wrath gasped into the comm system. Emergency shutdown of all security. Drones in Corridor 7. Override rejected. The computer applied. Drone operating under autonomous threat assessment. Protocols. Manual intervention required. David didn't wait for authorization. He stepped around Wrath and walked straight toward the drone, hands visible but not raised in surrender, more like someone approaching a frightened animal. David, stop, Wrath commanded. The drone will classify you as a threat. Already classified, David replied, not slowing. But it's focused on the students. I need to redirect its attention. The drone swiveled toward David, weapons recalibrating. Additional unauthorized intruder detected. Updating threat assessment. Ash's head turned slightly, copper eyes tracking David's movement. The dragon made a low sound, something between a growl and a question. David didn't look directly at him, but made a small hand gesture, fingers spread, then closing. Wait, trust me. Wrath watched in disbelief as the dragon settled. Lower, maintaining the protective barrier but not advancing, no verbal command, no control mechanism, just understanding between two beings who had learned to communicate beyond words. Drone, David called out. I'm David Reed, civilian contractor here for faculty. Interview, authorization code should be in your system, no authorization found. You are classified as hostile intruder. Surrender or be eliminated, not surrendering, David said calmly. He moved to the left, drawing the drone's targeting sensors away from the students, but I am questioning your threat assessment. You're about to kill 6 students who belong in this facility. That's not protecting the academy, that's destroying it. Intruders detected in restricted corridor during lockdown protocols. The drone responded. Standard security response initiated. David kept moving, slowly circling. Ash's wings adjusted position, always keeping the students covered while tracking David's progress. The dragon and the human moved like dancers who had practiced this routine 1,000 times. The students aren't intruders, David continued. Check their biosignatures against enrollment records, cross reference with class schedules. You'll find they're supposed to be here. Systems malfunction detected, the drone admitted. Unable to access enrollment database, proceeding with threat elimination based on visual identification. Rat's mandibles clicked rapidly, a complete system failure. The drone couldn't tell students from intruders, couldn't access the very databases that should prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe. In another few seconds it would fire on David, and once he fell, nothing would stop it from targeting the students again, except Ash. David made another hand gesture, this one sharp and quick. The dragon moved with precision that defied its size. Wings snapped forward, creating a gust of wind that knocked the drone off its stabilizers, not destroyed, just off balance for crucial seconds. David rushed forward, jumped and grabbed onto the drone's undercarriage. His fingers found the manual maintenance panel, the one required by consortium safety regulations that nobody thought would ever be needed. Mechanical override. David grunted, yanking the panel open. Every automated system has to have one. Basic engineering. The drone spun, trying to shake him off. Energy weapons. Couldn't fire at something attached to its own body without destroying itself. It banked hard into the wall instead, trying to crush David against reinforced plating. Ash roared, not the sound of a predator but something deeper, wrath. Felt it vibrate through the floor, through the walls, through every bone in an insectoid body, and not designed to process such frequencies. The students cried out, covering their auditory organs, but the drone stopped just for a moment. Some deprogrammed survival instinct recognized the sound of an apex predator and froze. David used that moment. His fingers found the power coupling, twisted hard and pulled. The drone systems shut down mid-flight, dropping toward the floor in dead weight. David jumped clear, rolled, came up in a crouch. The drone hit the ground with a crash that echoed through the corridor. Sparks flew from ruptured circuits. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of students breathing too fast and Ash's steady rumbling growl. Everyone okay? David asked, standing slowly. The Quilvan student named Pro unwrapped tentacles from the others and slithered forward cautiously. The monster saved us. Ash isn't a monster, David said, walking over to the dragon. He placed one hand on those massive scales, a gesture of reassurance and pride. Monsters are made by how they're treated, not by what they are. Prill moved closer, curiosity overcoming fear. But it's a scarneth we learned about them in xenobiology. They're classified as extinction-level threats. So are hurricanes, David replied. So are volcanoes. So are a lot of natural forces. Being dangerous doesn't make something evil, it just makes it powerful. What matters is how that power gets used. The other students crept forward, drawn by fascination stronger than fear. The Horth students' crystalline bodies brightened slightly, their version of excited interest. The Menus student floated closer, their gaseous form pulsing with something that might have been wonder. Can we touch it? When the Horde students asked, David looked at Ash. The dragon lowered its massive head, bringing those copper eyes level with the students. Steam rose from its nostrils in steady rhythm, breathing. Waiting. Go ahead, David said, but move slowly. Ask permission first. Prill extended one tentacle, moving carefully. May I? Ash's eyes focused on the student, then deliberately the dragon shifted its head closer. Prill's tentacle touched obsidian scales, recoiled, then touched again with more confidence. It's warm, Prill said with wonder. I thought predators would be cold. Another thing your xenobiology class got wrong, David said gently. Lots of classes get lots of things wrong when they teach fear instead of understanding. The other students joined in, touching scales and wings with the careful reverence of people encountering something impossible made real. Ash remained perfectly still, patient as stone, letting them explore. Wrath watched from the corridor entrance for arms hanging loose in posture that indicated complete uncertainty. The security team had finally arrived, weapons ready, faces showing confusion. At the scene before them, stand down. Wrath ordered quietly. The situation is contained, but Principal the Scarnath saved 6 students from a malfunctioning drone. Wrath interrupted while we were trapped behind blast doors following proper protocols. The security chief's expression cycled through several emotions before settling on reluctant acceptance. What are your orders? Wrath looked at David, at Ash, at students who moments ago had been terrified and were now laughing as the dragon's tail curled gently around them like a protective barrier. Escort Mr. Reed and his companion to faculty quarters, Wrath said, and schedule a full academy assembly for tomorrow morning. I believe we need to discuss what education really means. David's faculty quarters were designed for a species with 6 limbs and 3 times his body mass. The sleeping platform sat too high off the floor. The atmospheric controls were set to a humidity level that made his clothes stick to his skin, and the lighting spectrum gave everything a purple tint that hurt his eyes. After a few minutes, he adjusted what he could and ignored the rest. Ash curled up in the corner that received the most warmth from the environmental systems, head resting on folded wings, eyes half closed but tracking every movement David made. Probationary position, David said aloud, reading the official notification that had appeared on his personal display. 2 weeks to prove my methods work. Failure results in immediate termination and removal from academy grounds. Ash made a questioning sound somewhere between a chirp and a growl. Yeah, I know, not exactly a vote of confidence. David scrolled through the rest of the message, but Wrath's giving us a chance. That's more than most administrators would do after the day we've had. The door chimed. David opened it to find Prill hovering in the corridor, tentacles coiled nervously. Mr. Reed, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Just David is fine, and no, you're not disturbing anything. He stepped aside. Want to come in? Prill slithered through the doorway, eyes widening at the sight of Ash. The dragon raised his head slightly, acknowledged the student with a slow blink, then settled back down. I wanted to thank you, Prill said, for today. In the corridor, most teachers would have waited for security. Security was locked out by their own protocols. David replied, sometimes waiting for the proper response means people get hurt unnecessarily, but you put yourself in danger for students you don't even know. David sat on the edge of the high sleeping platform, legs dangling. That's what teachers do, or should do. Anyway, can I ask you something? Prill's tentacles uncurled slightly. Of course. Why are you here at this academy? I mean, what made you want to study in tour? PC's cooperation. The question seemed to catch Prill off guard. Tentacles flickered through a pattern that David's limited xenobiology knowledge recognized as uncertainty. I'm supposed to say, because the Quilvan government believes in building galactic unity, Prill said slowly. That's the official answer, but honestly, I'm here because back home we're taught that other species are threats to be managed, not people to understand. I wanted to see if that was true. And what have you found? That fear makes terrible education. Prill moved closer to Ash, who watched with patient copper eyes. We spend so much time learning about differences that we never study similarities, about what makes species dangerous instead of what makes them worth knowing. David smiled. You're going to do well in my class. You're really going to teach interspecies cooperation starting tomorrow, if Principal Rath approves the final paperwork. David's expression grew serious. Fair warning though, my methods aren't traditional. I don't follow approved curriculums or standard protocols. I teach what works even when it looks chaotic to people used to order. Good, Prill said firmly. Traditional methods gave us a 73% failure rate. Maybe chaos is exactly what we need. The next morning, David stood outside classroom 7 while students filed in with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. 12 different species, all required to take this course, none of them happy about it. A Vort student took a seat in the far corner, predator eyes tracking everyone who entered. Across the room, a Slith student positioned herself as far from the Vort as possible, prey instinct screaming danger with every breath. The two had nearly killed each other last term. Their presence together now was testimony to the Academy's desperate need for solutions. Rath observed from the back of the room, all 4 arms crossed in a posture David had learned meant skeptical attention. David entered last, without Ash. The students' confusion was immediate and obvious. They had all heard about the dragon, had seen security footage, had spread rumors through every communication channel available. They expected spectacle. Instead, they got a human in plain clothes, carrying nothing but a data pad. My name is David Reed, he began, sitting on the edge of the instructor's desk instead of standing behind it. I'm a new interspecies cooperation instructor. Before we start, I need to be honest with you. I'm not qualified for this position by any standard the consortium recognizes. I have no Teaching credentials, no formal education in xenopsychology. And until yesterday, I never set foot in an educational facility like this one. The VOR student's ears flattened. Then, why are we wasting time with you? Because I've spent the last 3 years learning to cooperate with someone the entire galaxy calls a monster. David met the Vorant's gaze steadily. And if I can build friendship with a Scarath, you can learn to work with the SIL students sitting across from you. That's different, the Vor protested. She's pray I am predative. Our species have killed each other for thousands of years, so have mine and Ash's, David replied. Longer than your species have had space flight, but we found common ground anyway. Want to know how? The classroom fell silent. Even the students, who had been whispering to each other, stopped. I stopped seeing him as a category, David said, not a Scarnath, not a predator, not a threat assessment. Just Ash, an individual trying to survive in a universe that wanted him dead before he even hatched. Once I saw him that way, everything else became possible. You're saying we should ignore our biology? The SIL student asked. Pretend our instincts don't exist? I'm saying your instincts are information, not commands. David stood walking among the desks. Yes, you're wired to fear predators. Yes, you're wired to hunt prey, but you're also sapient beings, capable of rational thought. You can acknowledge the fear and choose not to be controlled by it. A horse student raised one crystalline limb. Easy to say when you're not the one at risk. Born students have actually attacked Eslith students here. That's not theoretical danger. You're right, David acknowledged, and that's why we're going to address it directly. No pretending the danger doesn't exist. No forcing cooperation through rules and regulations. We're going to build trust the hard way. You pulled up a high-low display showing the class schedule, then deleted it. Approved curriculum requires 16 weeks of theoretical study before any practical application. David said, we're going to do the opposite. Your homework for tonight is simple. Find one student in this room you've been avoiding, learn their name, learn why they're here. That's it. The students stared at him like he'd spoken in an unknown language. That's not homework. Someone protested. That's just talking. Exactly, David said, because before you can cooperate with someone, you have to see them as someone worth cooperating with, not a species, not a biological category, a person. Wrath's mandibles clicked from the back of the room. David couldn't tell if it was approval or concern. What about exams? Another student asked. Skill assessments, things that actually matter for grades. Those will come, David assured them. But they'll measure different skills than you're used to. I don't care if you can recite xenobiology facts or cite consortium protocols. I care if you can work with someone different from yourself when it actually matters. The door opened. Ash walked in, moving with careful precision through furniture designed for smaller species. Students gasped, pressed back in their seats, reached for emergency alerts. This is Ash, David said calmly. He's going to be part of this class, not as a threat, not as a teaching tool, as a student, same as you. Dragons can't be students, the Vor said flatly. They're not sapient. Ash's copper eyes fixed on the Vor student. Then deliberately, the dragon moved to an empty space near the wall and settled down, head resting on crossed forelegs in perfect mimicry of attentive student posture. He understands more than you think, David said, and he's going to teach you more than I ever could about what cooperation really means. 2 weeks changed everything and nothing. The academy's hallways still looked the same, still processed the same atmospheric mixtures, still maintained the same temperature zones, but the students moving through them were different. Prill ate lunch with a Horth student discussing temper mechanics while sharing food neither species could actually digest, but appreciated anyway. The Vorant and Aslith students who had nearly killed each other last term were working on a joint thesis about predator-prey dynamics in modern society. Small groups formed across species barriers, studying together in ways that made Rath's administrative reports look like documentation of miracles. David's classroom had become the unofficial gathering place during free periods. Students brought projects there, asked questions there, stayed after class, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Ash usually occupied the corner near the window, serving as both guardian and conversation piece for students who had stopped seeing him as dangerous and started seeing him as the most patient listener on the station. Then the consortium inspection team arrived. High Arbiter Kellen came aboard with an escort of security personnel and a reputation that made even Rath nervous. The architects were the species that had designed most consortium protocols, had written the regulations that governed interstellar education, had decided which species qualified as civilized and which did not. Kellen stood in Rath's office, all 7 meters of crystalline authority radiating disapproval through multiple light spectrums. You allowed a human to teach, Kellen said. The architect's voice came from vibrations in their structure, translated by systems that struggled to capture the undertones and permitted Scareth to remain on educational grounds. These are not minor violations, Principal Rath. The humans' methods have produced results, Rath replied, trying to keep all 4 hands steady. Student performance increased 40% across all metrics. Interspecies conflicts dropped to 0. Collaborative projects results do not justify endangerment. Kellen's light patterns shifted to harsh red. I have reviewed security footage. The creature you call Ash has free movement throughout this facility. It has contact with students. Any incident would result in casualties. The consortium cannot accept there have been no incidents yet. Kellen moved to the window overlooking the main courtyard where students gathered between classes. Statistical probability suggests violence is inevitable. Scarnef biology demands predatory behavior. The humans' claims of control are unsupported by scientific evidence. Rath watched David in the courtyard below, sitting on a bench with Ash beside him while students clustered around asking questions. The dragon's tail curled protectively around a group of smaller species students who were using it as a backrest while studying. I have issued formal termination orders, Kellen continued. The human will be removed from Academy grounds within 24 hours. The Scarnef will be transferred to consortium custody for proper containment and study. Rat's mandibles click sharply. You mean dissection? The creature represents unique research opportunities. Its survival this long suggests genetic modifications that require investigation. Ash is not research material. The word surprised Rath even as they emerged. He's a student here, part of this community. Kellen's light patterns flickered too. Something that might have been. Amusement, you become compromised. Principal emotional attachment to an inappropriate educational experiment. This is precisely why protocols exist. To prevent sentiment from overriding. Safety, the office door chimed. Wrath. Granted access, expecting security. Instead, Prill entered, followed by steady stream of students representing every species in the academy. They filled the office, packed the hall. Outside, their faces showing determination that transcended biological differences. High Arbiter, Prill said formally, we request permission to address the consortium's termination orders. Students have no standing in administrative decisions. Kellen replied, return to your classes. With respect, this decision affects our education directly. Prill moved forward, tentacles steady despite obvious nervousness. We have prepared documentation supporting Mr. Reed's continued employment. A horse student activated a hollow display showing comprehensive data analysis, academic performance across all departments, increased an average of 40% since David began teaching. Student satisfaction surveys reached highest recorded levels. Mental health assessments show marked improvement in stress management and social integration, collaboration between previously hostile species. Groups increased by 300%, added the sillies. Student who had once tried to kill the Vor now standing beside her. Projects completed successfully, 23 this term. Compared to 3 last term, Kellen's structure hummed with irritation. Numbers are irrelevant when weighed against safety concerns. Then consider this number. The Vor student said 0. That's how many incidents have occurred since Ash arrived. 0 attacks, 0 injuries, 0 conflicts requiring security intervention. Compare that to the 15 incidents per week we average before. Temporary statistical anomaly. Kellen dismissed. Skarnath aggression is inevitable. You're wrong. Prill's voice carried conviction that made even Kellen pause. Ash protected us when the security drone malfunctioned. He could have escaped, could have saved himself. But he stayed and shielded students he barely knew. That's not aggression. That's exactly what we're supposed to learn in cooperation classes. More students stepped forward, each sharing experiences that painted a picture Wrath had been watching develop but hadn't fully appreciated until seeing it documented. Students who had been failing were now excelling. Species that had avoided each other for generations were forming genuine friendships. Academy had transformed from a place where cooperation was mandatory to a place where it happened naturally. This is emotional manipulation, Kellen said. You've been conditioned to accept danger as normal. We've been taught to see past danger to possibility. Corrected a Mindra student. That's different. Kellen's light patterns shifted through several colors before settling on harsh white. The decision stands. The human and creature will be removed. This meeting is concluded. The students didn't move. They stood together, species mixing in ways that would have been impossible a month ago. United in purpose that transcended individual interests. Then we strike. Prill said quietly, no classes, no cooperation with consortium protocols, no participation in any academy functions until David and Ash are reinstated. You cannot strike, Kellen said. Students have no authority for collective action. Check your own regulations. The Horth student replied. Article 7, Section 12. students maintain right to peaceful protest regarding educational policies that directly affect their learning environment. This qualifies. Rath felt something shift in the office, not physical movement, but a change in the balance of power that protocols and authority structures couldn't quite capture. The students had learned David's lessons well. They had found common ground, built something stronger than fear, and were now defending it with the same determination Ash had shown, protecting them from the malfunctioning drone. You would sacrifice your education for a human and a monster, Kellen asked. David taught us that monsters are made by how they're treated, not by what they are. Prill replied, the only monsters here are the systems that judge potential by categories instead of actions. Silence filled the office. Kellen's light patterns cycled through colors that suggested complex processing. Finally, they settled on dim blue. I will grant extension, Kellen said. 1 term. Quarterly reviews, comprehensive monitoring, immediate shutdown at first sign of incidents, but understand this clearly: any violence, any failure to maintain standards in both human and creature will be removed permanently. Agreed, Rath said before anyone else could speak. Will exceed your standards. See that you do. Kellen moved toward the door, students parting reluctantly. This experiment of yours may prove interesting or disastrous. Time will reveal which. When the consortium team departed, the students erupted in celebration. Tentacles wrapped around crystalline limbs. Predator species embraced prey species. And through it all, Rath watched with growing certainty that something fundamental had changed. David appeared in the doorway, Ash's massive head visible behind him. Heard there was some excitement, David said. Your students just taught me more about courage than 30 cycles of administration, Rath replied. Welcome to permanent faculty, Mr. Reed. 3 months later, the academy looked nothing like the institution Rath had run for 30 cycles. The changes weren't architectural. The same corridors still wound through the station. The same atmosphere processors still hummed there. Constant adjustments. The same temperature zone still shifted with mathematical precision. But everything else had transformed. Students gathered in mixed species groups without prompting, sharing study spaces and conversation with the ease of people who had forgotten why they once stayed separate. The cafeteria that had been rigidly segregated by biological requirements now featured tables where species mixed freely, trading foods they couldn't eat but appreciated for the gesture of sharing. Rath found David in the observation deck, watching Ash perform evening flight practice outside the station. The dragon moved through space with grace that defied physics, wings catching solar radiation and converting it to propulsion through method scientists still didn't fully understand. I brought tea, Rath said, offering a container specifically mixed for human consumption, or what your species calls tea. Still uncertain if I prepared it correctly, David accepted it with a smile. The fact that you tried means more than getting it perfect. He took a sip, went slightly, then took another, though for future reference. Less heat. Humans prefer their beverages warm, not scalding, noted. Rath settled into the observation deck seating, designed for species 3 times larger, but comfortable enough. I wanted to discuss your curriculum expansion proposal. Already got complaints from traditional faculty, David asked. actually requests 5 other instructors. Want to observe your methods, 2 are considering adopting similar approaches. Rath's mandibles clicked in what David had learned was amusement. The consortium's quarterly review showed results they classified as statistically improbable. They're sending researchers to study how you achieve them by not treating students like data points. David watched Ash loop through a complicated aerial maneuver. Every traditional approach focuses on managing differences. I just taught them that differences are worth celebrating. Instead of controlling, a soft chime indicated incoming communication. Rath accepted it, and a hollow display materialized, showing a species neither of them recognized. For legs, 8 eyes, arranged in a circular pattern. Bioluminescent patterns across what might have been skin or might have been fur. This is the Academy of Advanced Species, Rath said formally. How may we assist you? I am coordinator Vest of the Luminari. The being replied, we recently achieved interstellar capability and wish to apply for student admission. However, consortium preliminary assessment classified us as too primitive for institutional acceptance. David stood, moving closer to the hollow display. What makes them say you're too primitive? Our biology is incompatible with standard atmospheric systems. Our communication methods don't translate well to consortium standard. Our cultural development doesn't match approved progression models. Vess's bioluminescence flickered in patterns that suggested resignation. We were told to develop further and reapply in 50 cycles. Rath felt familiar conflict rising. Consortium protocols were clear. Species needed to meet specific benchmarks before integration into educational systems. The standards existed for good reasons, protecting both the species and existing students from incompatibilities that could prove dangerous. Then Rath looked at David, at the human who by all official standards shouldn't be teaching here, and remembered a dragon that shouldn't exist anywhere near students. Send us your biological requirements, Rath said, in your cultural information packets. We'll review them and provide response within 1 cycle, but the consortium classification is advisory, not absolute. Rath interrupted. This academy maintains autonomy in admissions decisions. We'll make our own assessment. When the communication ended, David was grinning. You just completely ignored consortium recommendations. I learned from the best. Rath pulled up Vess's preliminary files. Though I should mention, modifying atmospheric systems for a new species will cost more than our discretionary budget allows, so we Fundra get current students involved. Make it a community project. David scrolled through the luminaries. Biological data, their bioluminescence is actually fascinating, could create incredible opportunities for students studying light-based communication. Rats compound eyes track the data with growing interest. You see teaching opportunities where consortium sees complications. That's because consortium protocols measure problems. I measure potential. David closed the files. Besides, isn't that what you did when you hired me? Saw potential instead of just seeing a human who violated every standard. I saw someone who walked in with a dragon and made me question 30 cycles of certainty. Rath said, you taught me more about education in 3 months than I learned in 3 decades of administration. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Ash Complete another aerial pattern. Other students had gathered at various observation points around the station, watching the dragon's flight with appreciation instead of fear. Prill entered the observation deck, tentacles, carrying data pads and what looked like decorative materials. Hope I'm not interrupting. Prill said, "We're organizing an appreciation event for David and wanted to confirm details." "You don't need to do that," David protested. "We want to." Prill distributed data pads, showing elaborate plans. Every species contributing something from their culture, music, art, food, performance. A celebration of everything we've learned about cooperation. This will violate numerous event planning protocols, Wrath observed, scrolling through the plans. At least 15 species, specific safety regulations, multiple atmospheric compatibility requirements, and several noise ordinances. Prill's tentacles droop slightly, "So we can't do it." "I didn't say that." Wrath's mandibles clicked. "I said it violates protocols, but protocols exist to serve students, not control them. If you can demonstrate proper safety planning and coordinate the logistics, I'll approve it." Prill brightened immediately. "Really? David taught me that sometimes the best results come from controlled chaos." Wrath said, "Just keep the chaos properly controlled." After Prill left to share the news, David turned to Wrath with an expression of genuine curiosity. "What happened to the administrator who ran this place by absolute protocol?" He walked in with a dragon at his side. Wrath replied quietly and finally understood what friendship actually means, which is choosing connection over convenience, seeing potential in the unexpected, building bridges instead of maintaining walls. Wrath gestured toward the students visible through the observation deck window. "You didn't just teach them cooperation, David. You taught me that everything I built here was structured around fear of failure instead of hope for success." Ash returned from flight practice, landing on the external platform with precision that barely disturbed the airlock system. The dragon shook its wings, scattering residual solar radiation, patterns that looked almost like fireworks. 30 cycles I spent creating the perfect educational institution. Wrath continued. Perfect protocols, perfect safety measures, perfect segregation of species by biological compatibility, and it produced perfect failure. Students who graduated with credentials but without understanding. "You were doing your best with what you knew," David said gently. "I was maintaining systems that felt safe instead of building connections that actually mattered." Wrath stood, all four arms gesturing in a pattern that indicated both frustration and liberation. "But you show me another way, a better way." Students began arriving for evening study sessions, filling the observation deck with a comfortable chaos of multiple species working together. The Vorin and Slith students claimed their usual corner books and data pads spread between them. Horth students helped men students with calculations that required precise measurement. Quilvan students demonstrated problem-solving techniques to species that processed information completely differently. That I in the middle of it all. Ash settled into his customary position, massive form serving as desk space, backrest, and ambient heater for students who had long since stopped seeing danger and started seeing friend. David moved through the study groups, offering guidance where needed, asking questions that made students think deeper, and occasionally just listening to conversations that proved learning was happening without any teaching required. Wrath watched from the administrative station, working through approval requests for curriculum modifications, facility expansions, and a luminary admission application. Each decision felt lighter than before, freed from the weight of maintaining perfect protocol adherence. That a message arrived from Kellen, the quarterly review report arriving precisely on schedule as consortium regulations required. Wrath opened it expecting criticism, prepared for complications. Instead found 3 words that seemed impossible coming from an architect. Continue current methods. The full report detailed academic improvements, safety records, and student satisfaction, metrics that exceeded every benchmark the consortium had established. But what caught Rat's attention was the final paragraph written in Kellen's characteristic precision. Initial assessment classified this educational approach as dangerous experiment with high probability of failure. 3 months of observation suggests opposite conclusion. The human David Reed has demonstrated that effective cooperation education requires abandoning rigid protocol adherence in favor of adaptive relationship building. While this methodology remains outside standard consortium recommendations, results justify continued implementation. Other institutions are being advised to study these methods for potential adoption. Architect consensus agrees. Sometimes breaking old patterns creates better futures. Wrath read it 3 times, mandibles clicking with something between vindication and wonder, then shared it with David, who smiled and said exactly what Wrath expected. Their learning, too, took them longer than they students, but they're getting there. Evening deepened in a station night cycle. Students gradually departed for their quarters, leaving behind study materials and quiet gratitude. Ash stretched wings, spreading to their full impressive span before folding again. With practice precision. Walk with me, David asked Raph. There's something I want to show you. They moved through corridors now decorated with student artwork representing dozens of different species, cultural expressions, collaborative pieces mixing styles and mediums that shouldn't work together but somehow did. The academy had become a living demonstration of its own educational philosophy. David stopped at Classroom 7, the space where everything had started 3 months ago. Inside, students had created a mural covering one entire wall. It showed Ash shielding students from the malfunctioning drone, but rendered in artistic styles from every species present that day. Each had contributed their culture's interpretation of the same moment. They did this during free periods, David explained. Wanted to commemorate the day they learned that protection comes in unexpected forms. It's beautiful, Wrath said honestly and completely against facility decoration protocols. Are you going to make them remove it? Wrath looked at the mural, at the way it captured not just an event but the transformation that followed. No, I'm going to commission more wall space for future collaborative art projects. If we're breaking protocols, we might as well do it comprehensively. David laughed, the sound echoing through the empty classroom. Ash's head appeared in the doorway, checking on them with the devoted attention of someone who had learned to care for beings completely different from himself. Thank you, Wrath said suddenly, for walking in with a dragon at your side, for not accepting My initial rejection for teaching me that friendship isn't weakness or sentiment or deviation from proper procedure, it's the foundation. Everything else builds on. You would have figured it out eventually, David said. Maybe, but you gave me permission to try. Wrath gestured toward the mural. 30 cycles I spent building walls. You spent 3 months building bridges. I know which approach I prefer now. They stood together in the classroom where impossible things have become normal, where human and an insect administrator had discovered that friendship transcends biology, protocol, and fear. Outside, stars wheeled through endless space, indifferent to the small miracles happening on one educational station. But inside those miracles mattered students who had learned to see past differences, an administrator who had learned to value connection over control, and a dragon who had proven that monsters are made by treatment, not nature. David walked in with a dragon at his side, and the alien principal finally understood friendship